I reckon there's a kind of dark that don't just sit around you. It moves in, sets down roots, gets comfortable in your chest like it means to stay. 3 nights, 3 nights since my last candle guttered out that sad little stub of tallow Thomas bought from the mercantile, back when we still had coins for such things. I watched it go, sat right here at this table, and watched the flame get smaller and smaller until it was just a blue whisper. And then, nothing, just me in the dark and the sound of my own breathing. I mean, you'd think a woman would panic. Wouldn't you, alone in a cabin in February in Wyoming territory with no light, no oil, barely enough flour to dust the bottom of the tin? But here's the thing nobody tells you about losing everything at some point. You stop counting what's gone. You just stop. My name is Grace Sullivan. I'm 29 years old, and I've been a widow for 18 months come Tuesday. Not that I'm counting the months anymore either. Thomas went down with pneumonia the summer before last, strong one day, coughing the next, gone by Friday. I remember his hands the morning before the fever hit. He was shelling peas on the porch, humming that hymn he never got the words right to, and his thumbnail had a black half moon of garden dirt under it. I watched his hands work and I thought those are the safest hands in the world. 3 days later, I was folding them across his chest. I sold the horse to pay for the burial, sold the good furniture to make it through that first winter. This second winter, well, I ran out of things to sell somewhere around November. The cabin smelled different in the dark. I'd noticed that. When the light went, other senses got louder. The grain of the pine table under my fingertips. Rough in one direction, smooth the other. The weight of cold air pressing against my skin like something with hands. The particular silence of a house where nobody's coming home. I'd stopped opening the curtains. What was the point? Inside dark. Outside dark. Same darkness, wearing different clothes. I ate what I had, which was close to nothing. Slept when the cold let me. Sat in my chair the rest of the time, hands in my lap, listening to wind howl through the gap under the door Thomas always meant to fix. And here's what scared me honestly. Truly scared me more than the cold or the empty cupboard or the wolves I heard some nights up on the ridge. I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had just up and quit, like a hired hand who'd had enough of bad wages and worse weather. A woman alone in a February cabin with no light and no food should feel something. Terror, desperation, anger at God, at least. But I sat in that chair and felt the walls closing in, and I thought, well, this is just how it is now. This is just what happens to women like me. I tried to speak, just to hear a human voice, even my own. The sound that came out was, it was like something that had been buried, dry and strange, and not quite mine anymore. I couldn't remember the last time I'd spoken aloud. And sitting there in the dark, listening to that rusted voice echo off the walls, I thought, when did I stop being a person and become just a body waiting in a room? The knock came on the 4th evening. I froze. Not fear, exactly something worse. Shame, pure, bone-deep shame that hit me so hard I pressed my back against the wall and held my breath like a child hiding from a thunderstorm. Because whoever was on that porch, if I opened the door, they'd see the dark cabin and the cold stove and the woman who'd let herself become this. The knock came again, harder, then a voicemail, quiet, uncertain, like a man who wasn't sure He had the right to be standing where he was standing. Ma'am, I ride past here most evenings, and I noticed, well, ain't been smoke from your chimney in some days. Just wanted to make sure you was all right. I closed my eyes, willed him gone. Go away. Please, just go away. Don't make me open this door and let you see what I've become. But he knocked a third time, softer now, and something in that softness, the way it wasn't demanding, wasn't pushing, made my hand move to the latch before my pride could stop it. I opened the door 3 inches, maybe 4. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and horse and frost. And behind it, moonlight. Lord, I'd forgotten what moonlight looked like. It poured through that crack like water through a broken dam. And in it, I saw him. Owen Briggs, I knew him by sight. The way you know most folks in a territory this empty, a rancher from a few miles east. Small spread, quiet man, worn coat with the collar turned up, patched boots, hat already in his hands, not a wealthy man. You could see that plain enough. I'm fine, I said. The lie came out thin as paper. Just conserving is all. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Briggs. He looked at me, or tried to, through that sliver of open door, and I could feel him weighing whether to push. Men do that sometimes, push past a woman's words to what they think she really means. But Owen Briggs just nodded. Yes, ma'am. Well, you need anything? My place is just east along the creek road. He put his hat back on. Good night, Mrs. Sullivan. Good night. I closed the door, leaned against it, and my heart, God, my heart was hammering, loud and fast and alive, in a way it hadn't been in weeks, maybe months. I pressed my hand against my chest and felt it beating under my palm, and I was so angry at that heartbeat, at the proof that I was still alive enough to react to a stranger's concern. I locked the door, as if a lock could keep out the thing I was actually afraid of, the possibility that someone noticed I was disappearing. Next evening, I heard footsteps on the porch. No knock this time, just footsteps, careful, deliberate, and then the creak of something being set down on the wooden boards. And then those boots walking away again, getting quieter, gone. I waited, counted to 100 the way Thomas used to count when he was calming a spooked horse, slow, steady, patient. Then I opened the door. 3 candles, beeswax. I could tell by the color. That warm honey gold you don't get with tallow. A bundle of kindling tied neat with twine, and a small jar of preserved berries. The glass catching moonlight like something precious. No note, didn't need one. I knew. I stood in that doorway, holding those candles, and I did the arithmetic. You know, the way women do when someone gives them something. Beeswax candles cost real money. And Owen Briggs was not a man with real money to spare. He'd given me the good ones, not tallow, not the cheap stubs from the bottom of the barrel at the mercantile. Beeswax, the kind that burn clean and slow and smell like summer. Something in my chest pulled tight, like a rope knotted around a fence post holding. I carried everything inside, set the candles on the table, unwrapped the kindling, and then I struck a match. That first flame, well, I don't know how to describe it except to say it hurt. Not my eyes, though Lord knows they'd gotten used to darkness. It hurt somewhere deeper. The cabin flooded with golden light, and suddenly I could see everything I'd been hiding from. My hands thin, the bones showing through like fence rails under snow. Dust on Thomas's chair, the one I hadn't sat in since he died. the one I couldn't bring myself to move, and my own reflection in the window glass, staring back at me like a ghost gaunt, hollow, a woman I barely recognized. Light is honest. That's the thing about it. Darkness lets you pretend. Darkness smooths the edges and fills in the gaps and tells you everything's fine because you can't see the proof that it isn't. But light don't lie. Light shows you exactly what you've become. I sat down, opened the jar of berries, ate them one at a time, pressing each one against the roof of my mouth before biting down. The sweetness was, honestly, it was almost painful, like my tongue had forgotten what flavor was. And here it was coming back all at once, sharp and bright and real. I didn't cry. Not yet. I wasn't ready for that. But I sat in that golden glow, berry juice staining my fingers, and I breathed from a place in my lungs I hadn't used in a long time. Deeper, slower, like a woman remembering she had a body and not just a shadow. I left one candle burning through the night. Not because I needed the light for anything practical, because I wasn't ready to go back to the dark. Not yet. Owen Briggs came at dusk. Every evening. Same time when the sky turned that particular shade of purple gold that only happens in Wyoming winter. When the cold deepens, but the light softens, and the world gets quiet like it's holding its breath. He never stayed more than 15 minutes. Never stepped inside without being asked. He'd bring something small flour one evening, with coins tucked inside the sack, so careful I almost missed them. A jar of honey another time, dark and thick from his own hives. Firewood, already split to the exact size of my stove, like he'd studied it while standing on my porch. I started watching for him. I'd catch myself at the window round the time the light changed, eyes on the road east, waiting for the shape of him against the sky. Then I'd pull myself back, straighten my spine, tell myself I was checking the weather. The lie got thinner every evening. We talked, him and me, short conversations, practical. I learned he ran 40 acres alone, parents gone young, no siblings, just Owen and the land, and a few head of cattle that somehow survived each winter by sheer stubbornness. I reckon they took after him. "You manage all that alone?" I asked one evening, before I could stop myself from sounding interested. "Yes, ma'am." He turned his hat in his hands. "It ain't much, but it's mine. Folks around here don't pay much mind to a man with a small spread and no family name, but a man don't need their attention if what he's got is honest." I heard something in that, something quiet and worn, like a stone that's been carried in a pocket for years. He knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to be made small by other people's measuring. I suspected he was giving to me from a cupboard nearly as bare as mine had been. The flour, the honey, the candles, every one of them cost him something he probably couldn't spare. And that confused me in a way I didn't have words for. I started keeping the cabin neater, swept the floor, opened one curtain, just the one facing east, told myself it was for the morning light, not for watching the road, not for him. I noticed things, against my will, against my better judgment. I noticed things about Owen Briggs, how he removed his hat the moment he stepped onto my porch, not a show of manners, just something his bones knew to do, how his hands were rough from work, but careful, so careful, when he set things on my table. And once, when he didn't know I was watching, the way he pressed his palm flat against my doorframe before leaving, just held it there for a second, like he was steadying himself or saying goodbye to the warmth. That one got me. I couldn't explain why, but that one got me. One evening, the 5th visit, I think I offered him coffee. First time. The word came out before I decided to say it, and there was no taking it back. He accepted, sat at my table, wrapped both hands around the cup, and drank without speaking. The cabin felt different with two people breathing in it, smaller in some ways, larger in others, like the walls had been waiting for a second heartbeat to give them purpose. "Much obliged, Mrs. Sullivan," he said when he finished. "Grace," I said, and then, because the word felt too naked, just sitting there, I added, "Nobody calls me Mrs. Sullivan except the mercantile ledger." The smallest smile. "Grace, then, good night." "Good night, Owen." He left. I stood in the doorway, listening to his boots on the frozen ground, that steady, unhurried rhythm, until I couldn't hear them anymore. And I thought, Lord, when did his footsteps become a sound I recognized? The 6th evening, Owen arrived carrying something different, small, wrapped in cloth, held against his chest like it was breakable. I came across this," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Thought you might, well," he held it out. I unwrapped the cloth, and inside a book, small, leather-bound, the spine cracked with age, Tennyson, Poems by Alfred, Lord Tennyson. I stared at it. I'd mentioned reading exactly once, weeks ago, a throwaway line, something about how I used to love poetry, back when evenings had light enough to read by. I barely remembered saying it. A sentence I tossed out like a seed on dry ground, not expecting anything to grow. He remembered. He listened to one careless sentence, and he held it. "Owen," I said, and my voice had a crack in it I couldn't smooth over. "Where did you—" "Fella in town had it. We made a trade." I looked down at his feet. His good boots, the brown ones with the solid soles, the ones he wore every evening, were gone. In their place, a pair so worn, I could see the shape of his toes pressing through cracked leather, soles thin as paper. The arithmetic again, that terrible, wonderful arithmetic. He'd traded his good boots, his only good boots, in a Wyoming February for a book of poetry, because I'd mentioned once that I used to love to read. "I can't accept this," I whispered. "Well, now," he shifted his weight, and I could hear the cold ground through those ruined soles. "That'd be a shame, 'cause I ain't got no use for poetry, and I reckon them boots was getting too comfortable anyhow. Owen, good night, Grace." Quiet stubbornness, not pride certainty, the certainty of a man who knew exactly what he'd done and would do it again. He left. I stood holding that book like it was made of glass and fire and every beautiful, terrifying thing in the world. I sat down at my table, opened to a page at random, and I read aloud, "By candlelight," in a voice that shook at first, and then steadied, and then filled the cabin. My voice, in my cabin, reading words that were written for women who still believed beautiful things existed. I read 3 poems, and then I cried. Not Thomas grief. I knew that kind of crying, the hollow, bottomless kind that empties you and leaves nothing behind. This was different. This was, it was the feeling of blood returning to frozen fingers. You know that ache when you've been out in the cold so long, your hands go numb, and you think the numbness is fine. You think you can live with the numbness, and then warmth finds you, and the feeling comes rushing back, and it hurts, God. It hurts so much worse than the cold ever did. That's what the crying was. Sensation returning to a heart that had gone numb. He didn't try to feed my body or warm my cabin, I mean. He did those things too. But the book was for the part of me I thought had starved to death. The part that thinks and feels and wants beautiful things. And Owen Briggs, who could barely afford his own supper, decided that part of me was worth his only good boots. I fell asleep with the book on my chest and the candle still burning. And for the first time in 18 months, I dreamed about something other than Thomas. I dreamed about tomorrow. I walked to town the following week. First time in, well, I'd lost count. But I was stronger now, steadier. The flour and honey had done their work, and the cold didn't settle in my bones quite the way it had before. I'd found the coins, Owen tucked inside the flour sack, 8 of them, pressed flat against the bottom where a proud woman might not think to look. His discretion, his kindness, wearing a disguise so my dignity could stay intact. The mercantile smelled like coffee and leather and kerosene. I gathered what I needed: salt, a tin of beans, a small bottle of lamp oil that I held in my hands like a treasure. I was counting out my coins at the counter when I heard them. 2 women near the fabric bolts, Mrs. Hadley and Mrs. Pierce. I recognized their voices the way you recognize the sound of a saw on wood. Sharp, precise, designed to cut. Every evening, Helen, every single evening. A widow and a bachelor. You know what that looks like. I'm just saying, a decent woman would think about appearances. Well, some women don't think about much besides their own comfort. Do they? My spine went rigid. Every muscle in my back pulled tight, like wire on a fence post. They weren't looking at me. Didn't need to. I felt those words land the way you feel a slap, the sting first, then the heat, then the slow, spreading understanding that someone has decided to make your life smaller. I paid for my things, walked out. The cold hit my face like a punishment. And by the time I reached the edge of town, my hands were shaking not from the temperature. They'd taken Owen's kindness, his candles, and his flour, and his poetry, and his ruined boots, and they'd turned it into something ugly, something small and mean and covered in that particular kind of mud that sticks to women and never quite washes off. The walk home took 40 minutes. By the time I reached my door, the old armor was back, fitted itself around me like a coat I'd only set down, not discarded. I built my case the way a lawyer would, logical, calm, airtight. Tell Owen to stop coming. Protect his name. Protect mine. Close the door. Go back to the dark. The dark was safe. The dark didn't whisper. He arrived at dusk. I met him on the porch, stiff, formal, arms crossed over my chest, like a woman holding herself together. Owen, people in town are talking about your visits, about us. I made myself look at him. You should stop coming. He listened, didn't interrupt, didn't argue, just stood there with his hat in his hands and let me finish. Then he said, quiet as creek water, they talked about me long before you. Grace, I stopped listening years ago. He put his hat on, tipped it. Good night. I watched him walk into the dark that steady, unhurried walk, and I stood there on that porch long after his shape disappeared into the evening. The cold crept through my dress, and I let it. I deserved it. I stood there until the stars came out, and the silence got so heavy I could feel it pressing on my shoulders. And somewhere in that silence, the lie I'd built so carefully, the one about protecting him, about being practical, about doing the sensible thing, it just fell apart, quiet, like a fence that had been leaning too long and finally gave way. I wasn't protecting him. I was protecting myself from the risk of keeping him. I went inside. The cabin was warm. The candles were lit. And I just told the only person who brought the flame to stop coming. I sat down at the table and I called myself every kind of fool a woman can be. He didn't come. I told myself I sat in my warm, lit cabin, and I told myself this was what I wanted. This was the right thing, the safe thing, the thing a sensible woman does when the town starts sharpening its tongues. The lie lasted about an hour. By the time full dark settled, I was pacing, not dramatic, frantic pacing, just restless movement, chair to window, window to stove, stove to table, table to chair, around and around like a woman walking a fence line, checking for breaks. The cabin had everything I'd lacked a month ago: light, warmth, food in the cupboard, coffee on the stove, and it felt emptier than it had in the pitch dark, when I'd had nothing but my own breathing and the walls closing in. I argued with myself. Lord, I argued like a woman standing in a courtroom of one. You survived alone before. Grace Sullivan, you survived 18 months of alone. You can survive this. But surviving, was that all I was doing? Is that all I'd been doing? Sitting in the dark, measuring time by sounds, counting what was left until there was nothing left to count that wasn't living. That was just dying slower than Thomas did. I picked up the Tennyson, opened it without choosing a page, the way Thomas used to open his Bible, letting it fall where it would, trusting the words to find him. And there it was, a passage about love, about how it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Words I'd heard before, words everyone's heard, but sitting in that cabin on that particular night, they didn't sound like poetry. They sounded like testimony, like a man standing in a witness box and swearing on everything sacred that the risk is worth the wreckage. I looked up from the page, my windowsill, 7 candles lined up in a row, one for each of Owen's visits. I'd placed them there without thinking about it, without deciding to, the way a woman sets flowers in a vase or marks days on a calendar. I'd been counting, keeping record of every evening he brought light to my door, keeping record of coming back to life. And then it hit me not as a thought, but as a feeling in my body first. My hands went tight around the book. My throat closed up. My chest felt like someone had wrapped a belt around it and pulled. I stood up from the chair because I couldn't sit still with what was rising through me. I was afraid of loving someone and losing them again. That was the truth underneath all of it. Not the town's whispers, not the scandal, not the practical concerns I dressed up so neatly and presented to Owen like a case for the defense. Thomas taught me that love opens a door that swings both ways, toward joy and toward devastation. And once you've walked through the devastation side, you think about that door differently. You think maybe it's better to board it up, nail it shut, sit in the dark where nothing can reach you, but sitting in a well-lit cabin feeling more alone than I did in the pitch dark that taught me something Thomas's death couldn't, something I had to learn on my own. The door was already open. I'd walked through it the night I lit the first candle. I set the book down, looked at those 7 candles glowing on my windowsill like a timeline of my thawing. Tomorrow was Valentine's Day, and I knew, sitting there with Tennyson in my lap and Owen's absence filling every corner of the room, I knew what I was going to do. The knowing terrified me. The knowing felt like, well, honestly, it felt like the first true thing I'd felt in 18 months. Valentine's morning, I woke before first light and lay in bed listening to my own heartbeat. Fast, steady, the heartbeat of a woman who'd made a decision and couldn't unmake it. I got up, heated water, scrubbed the cabin floor until the pine boards shone in the lamplight. I washed my hair cold water, but I didn't care. Braided it the way I used to, before Thomas died, before I stopped caring what I looked like because there was nobody to look. I took all 7 candles, Owen's candles, one for each visit, and placed them in the window. Every single one, lined up like sentinels, like a beacon, like a woman standing on a cliff, holding a lantern and saying, "Here, I'm here, come find me." Then I opened the trunk at the foot of my bed and took out the blue dress. I hadn't touched it since Thomas's funeral. It was the dress I married him in, simple cotton, dyed indigo, with pearl buttons down the front that my mother gave me the morning of my wedding. I'd folded it and put it away the day we buried him. And I told myself I was putting away more than a dress. I was putting away the woman who wore it, the woman who believed in things like Valentine's Day and poetry and candles and windows. My hands trembled buttoning it. I didn't stop. I brewed coffee, set 2 cups on the table. 2. The second cup was a declaration louder than anything I could have said with words. I stood back and looked at my cabin glowing, warm, smelling of coffee and beeswax and clean pine, and I thought, this is what it looks like when a woman decides to stop hiding. Then I opened the door, not a crack, not 3 inches, all the way. I opened it wide and stepped onto the porch and stood there in the golden light spilling out behind me. The cold hit my face and I let it, February air, sharp as a blade, and I stood in it wearing my blue dress and my mother's buttons and every ounce of courage I had left. I wasn't waiting for his knock. I was done waiting. The road stretched east into purple dusk, empty, quiet. For one terrible moment, I thought he's not coming. You pushed him away and he listened, and now you're standing on a porch in a blue dress, looking like every kind of fool. And then I saw him, walking up the road, hat in his hands, carrying something winter wildflowers, scraggly, imperfect, half-frozen stems he must have searched the cold ground for, because it was Valentine's and he came anyway. Even after what I said, even after I told him to stop, he came. He stopped when he saw me, stood there in the road, maybe 20 paces away, and I could see the surprise on his face, the open door, the candles blazing, me on the porch in a dress he'd never seen. I didn't wait for him to come to me. I walked down those porch steps and across the frozen ground in my good shoes, and I went to him, closed the distance myself. Every step was mine. Every step was a choice. We stood there, close enough that I could see the frost on his collar and the way his breath came out in small white clouds. He held the wildflowers between us, like a man who wasn't sure they were enough. Neither of us spoke. The silence held everything: the 7 candles, the ruined boots, the door I'd closed and the door I'd opened. All of it suspended in the cold air between 2 people who'd both been alone too long. Then I spoke. "Owen Briggs." My voice was steady, barely. "You traded your boots for poetry and gave your last candles to a stranger. Why?" He looked at me, candlelight and moonlight, in the last purple edge of sunset, all mixed together on his face, and his eyes were the most honest things I'd ever seen. "Because you ain't a stranger, Grace." Quiet, simple, true. "You're my light. You just don't know it yet." I felt the tears come, and I let them. I was done hiding from every beautiful, terrifying thing. "Then stop standing in the cold," I said, "and come home." I took his hand, pulled him toward the door. Not rescue, not surrender, not a woman being saved. A woman standing in golden light, in her mother's buttons, choosing to open the door she'd locked 18 months ago, and inviting someone in. He stepped inside. The 7 candles flickered with the draft. And for the first time in 18 months, my cabin held enough warmth for 2. I'm going to tell you something about morning light in a cabin that holds 2 people's breathing. It's different. I know that sounds simple, and I suppose it is. Really, when you strip it down to the bones, but simple things can carry the most weight. I'd woken up alone for 547 mornings, give or take. I'd stopped counting somewhere around 300, but my body kept the tally even when my mind gave up. That Valentine's morning, the morning after the light, came through my east window, soft and gold, and landed on Owen's boots by my door. His coat on the hook beside mine, 2 coffee cups on the table, still warm. We talked through the night, just talked. About Thomas, about his parents, about the particular loneliness of running a homestead alone, and how the silence gets so loud, some nights you'd trade your last dollar just to hear another voice. He'd fallen asleep in Thomas's chair around 3 in the morning, mid-sentence, hat still in his lap. I'd covered him with the quilt my mother made and sat across from him listening to him breathe. And I thought, so this is what it feels like. This quiet, ordinary thing. 2 people in a warm room, breathing. Late February has a sound, if you listen. The creek ice cracking just a little at the edges. First birdsong tentative, like the bird isn't quite sure winter's really leaving. The drip of snowmelt off the eaves, slow and steady as a heartbeat. Thaw, everything thawing. Owen woke to the smell of coffee, looked around, confused for a half-second, and then his eyes found mine, and he smiled. Not a big smile, not the kind that announces itself, just warmth. The way a candle doesn't shout, it just glows. Mornin', Grace. Morning, Owen. I poured his coffee. He took it with both hands, the way he always did. And I sat across from him with my own cup, and we drank in silence that wasn't empty anymore. It was the kind of silence that happens between people who've said the important things and can rest in the spaces between. I read Tennyson aloud after breakfast. He mended the leg on my kitchen chair, the one that had wobbled since October, the one I'd been meaning to fix and never did, because fixing things alone takes a particular kind of energy that grief steals from you early and returns last. He worked with his hands, and I read with my voice, and the cabin held us both, like it had been waiting for exactly this arrangement. This wasn't Thomas. Thomas spinning me barefoot across the kitchen floor the night he proposed. Laughing so hard, we knocked the flour tin off the shelf. That love was fire and speed, in the beautiful, reckless certainty of 19. This was different, quieter, the love of 2 people who'd both been cold and knew the value of shared warmth. I walked to the window that afternoon, looked out at the road, the same road Owen had walked that first evening, the evening he noticed my dark cabin and knocked. No smoke from the chimney, no glow in the windows. A house that looked abandoned. A woman who almost was. And I thought darkness wasn't my enemy. It was the signal. The absence that made someone look closer. My candles burning out wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment just before. Owen, I said. And he looked up from the chair leg with a question on his face. I'm going to town tomorrow. Need to buy a few things. Want company? I smiled. I do, actually, but there's one thing I aim to pick up myself. I didn't tell him what. Some things a woman needs to do on her own. The next day, I walked into the mercantile with my head high and Mrs. Hadley's eyes on my back. And I bought a candle, one single beeswax candle with my own money coins I'd earned selling preserves to the hotel kitchen 2 winters ago. Coins I'd been saving for I didn't know what. Now I knew. That evening, I placed it on the windowsill, beside Owen's 7, the 8th candle. His were for the nights he came to my door. Mine was for the night I opened it. I lit it myself, struck the match, touched it to the wick, and watched the flame catch and hold. Owen stood behind me, quiet, and I think he understood. I think he understood that this small, deliberate act, a woman buying her own candle and lighting it with her own hand, was the ending of one story and the beginning of another. I didn't need a man to save me from the dark. I needed to remember I was worth the light. Owen reminded me. But I'm the one who struck the match. 8 candles burned on my windowsill that evening. 7 for the man who brought the flame, 1 for the woman who finally believed she deserved it. I watched them glow against the February dusk, golden, steady, unwavering, and I leaned back against Owen's chest. And I thought, so this is what it looks like. When a woman comes back to life, not rescued, not repaired, rekindled,